Wondering how your mindset affects your life? How to bring more energy into your business and life? Millions of people around the world ask these same questions daily. You are in the right place. Learn practices that will help give your life the meaning and success you've been searching for. Welcome to the Charge Podcast, teaching you how to create habits around real goals every day. Practical life advice from those who made it. Here's your host, Gary Wilbers.
Chargers, it's been a change of pace these last 6 weeks for our world, but let's take the positives that's come from this pandemic. I know I appreciate some of the smaller things in life that I took for granted before. How about the smell of fresh flowers blooming, the beauty of trees budding to life, and the fresh cut of grass? As we start to move forward in this month of May, don't let the time just pass you by. Let's remember to live each day with that openness to experience life and be grateful for the small things in our life each day. My hope is you have renewed in yourself a new sense of wonder to take each day as a blessing. Let's remember to be present in our life and not just get through life. Remember our mantra of charge? Create habits around real goals every day. Chargers, I recently recorded a webinar entitled Positive Habits Equal Positive Results. If you are a leader who struggles with how to handle the daily stress in your life, with high performance coaching, we've created a framework that helps leaders gain clarity, energy, courage, productivity, and influence. When you get clarity, you get the feeling of full engagement, joy, and confidence that comes from consistently living from and into your full potential. To view this webinar, go to chargepodcast.com and we will have a link to the webinar on the page. Each week this month, we have a great guest lined up that will give you a perspective on how you can live your life with high performance. Our first guest this week is a first on the Charge Podcast. It is the first time I had the same guest on twice. John O'Leary was a guest on podcast number 3. I had the pleasure of meeting John back in 2009 when he spoke to my wireless team. Well, once you meet John, you become a friend, and he has also become one of my mentors, following my passion of speaking and sharing knowledge with others. John has an inspiring story and shares his message around the world. You will be inspired by his message to live in awe. John launches his second book this week on May 5th called In Awe. I was fortunate to be on the list and to be an early reader. I read this book before the pandemic, what we are going through right now, and thought, what a great read for today. With that, what has happened over the last couple of months, it is now what I would term a must read. So go to your favorite place to buy, listen, or get yourself a copy and be inspired to live your life in awe. Chargers, be prepared to get charged up on this podcast. Here is my friend and mentor, Mr. John O'Leary. Chargers, I'm so excited today. I get excited every day we launch a podcast, but this one is extra special because it's a dear friend, but it's also our first repeat guest ever back on the Charge Podcast. And this person deserves that to be the first because I tell you what, we go back about 10, 12 years, and I tell you, John's one of those individuals that he still today was encouraging me before we jumped on this podcast. So I know it's going to encourage you. So let me give you a little background on John O'Leary. In 1987, John O'Leary was a curious 9-year-old boy playing with fire and gasoline. John created a massive explosion in his home and was burned on 100% of his body. He was given less than 1% chance to live. This epic story of survival was first showcased in his parents' book, Overwhelming Odds, in 2006, originally printing just 200 copies for friends and family. His parents have sold over 60,000 copies. It was this book that first invited John to embrace his miraculous recovery and share it with the world. John inspires 50,000 plus people at 100 plus events each year. He speaks to companies and organizations across industries such as sales, healthcare, safety, marketing, finance, faith, education, and insurance. His emotional storytelling, unexpected humor, and authenticity make each of his presentations truly transformational. John's first book, On Fire, The 7 Choices That Ignite and Radically Inspired Life, was an instant #1 national bestseller. 200,000 plus copies have sold and has been translated into 12 languages. John's Live Inspired podcast is top rated Apple Podcast and has more than 2 million downloads. I'm trying to get there, John. Don't worry. His second book in all, Rediscover Your Childlike Wonder to Unleash Inspiration, Meaning, and Joy, will be published by Penguin Random House in May of 2020. John considers his greatest success to be his marriage to his wife, Beth, his 4 children, and his relationship with friends and family. John O'Leary, welcome to the Charge Podcast again.
Well, man, when I think of friends and family, Gary, I think of you, man. So you mentioned we've been buddies for 12 years. That is true. I met you at the very beginning of my professional journey forward, and you treated me like royalty then, when it was completely, utterly undeserved, and you've treated me as if I deserved it ever since. So it speaks volumes, not about me, but about you. So I'm delighted to be back, and I'm really thrilled to be your buddy, man. So Chargers, you follow a great man here.
Well, thanks, John, for saying yes. And I tell you, I'm so excited because, as you know, we've been going through this challenging time, very uncertain time right now. And people are starting to really feel, what can they do? And your message has always resonated with me because it was not just about being burnt. It's about what you can do coming out on the other side.
Right.
But I think we need to start the story with there, because as a 9-year-old boy, you were that curious boy, decided to play with fire. Can you tell our audience a little bit about that so they can really understand the message?
Right. There's a principle I think we all know to be true, but maybe we don't believe it in our own lives, and it's monkey see, monkey do. And we forget that we are on both sides of that equation. Sometimes we're the one being watched by others. Other times we're the one doing the watching. And either way, our decisions will impact what happens next. That's true as adults, Chargers, but it's also true as kids. And when I was 9, I saw big adult-like boys. They were all the way up at age 11, Gary, playing with fire and gasoline. And I assumed if those big boys could do that and get away with it, so could I. So on a Saturday morning, January 17, 1987, that's my date with destiny, January 17, I walked into the garage, bent over a can of gasoline, tried to pour just a little bit on top. And before the liquid came out, the fumes rushed out. They grabbed the flame, they pulled it back into the container, created this massive explosion. It split the can in 2, and it launched me 20 feet against the far side of the garage, setting my world quite literally and figuratively on fire. So that is the first page of the rest of my life. And it sounds tragic. I spent 5 months in hospital, Gary, and lost my fingers to amputation and have scars from my neck to my toes. And it could be a tragedy, but instead it's one of the most triumphant, beautiful, redemptive, grace-filled stories I'm aware of. And to be a part of it, I feel like I'm just a part of that story. I'm not the lead character. I'm just one of them. Blows my mind. So I feel like I'm the luckiest guy, most blessed guy in any room that I walk into.
And I know you feel that because I listen to your podcast on a regular basis, and I get to hear about as you're talking to your audiences. But I'm curious, John, because I know there's multiple lessons that came out of it. But what do you think the greatest lesson, looking back, you've learned from that accident?
Well, that's a deep, awesome question. Summarizing that into one point would almost be impossible, but I would give you a few. The first would be, we think we're self-made. In particular, as Americans, first world livers, we think like we can do it. Watch out. And then a recession hits, and then a plague spreads, and then cancer is the diagnosis. And then life happens, and you recognize how utterly little you can actually do all by yourself. But collectively, in particular, when you lean into your faith, how much we can get done together. So one of the great lessons for me is how weak I am in the grand scheme of life, and yet how critically important it is for me to show up with everything that I have. Everything. All my skill sets, all my talents. There's a parable in Scripture about whether you've got 5, 3, or 1 talent. It doesn't really matter. What matters is what you do with them. And I don't know how many talents you have, Gary. I don't know how many I have. I know people who have a lot more than I. But I know the calling is to use what you got for something bigger than yourself. So I've recognized that since being burned. And the second thing is to lean heavily into my faith, not only during times of crisis, which when you are in a hospital bed for 5 months and you're going through all kinds of things being done to you, that would be identified as a crisis-like moment. But also in life, when you think you're having a summiting type experience, and when you think you're on top of the world, killing it, watch out, world, I got this thing. It's maybe even more important during the times of success to recognize how important your God is, your spiritual journey for those of you who aren't believers in your journey going forward. So how little you are, but how important you are and how big your God is. Those are 3 important lessons for me.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's so true. And I think really it fits with what we're going through right now. We're in that uncertain time. Things are changing daily with the pandemic that has gone on and with the challenges that we're facing as an economy. But the one thing is we have something within ourselves. We've seen some massive heroes, and you saw those same heroes through a different journey, but people are seeing that. And there's one thing I would tell you is look back on those people that's made that difference and let them know. I think that becomes a real message that you've shared. I've seen some of the poignant stories that people have done where when Norris Roy came back to your life and you really celebrating the people that matter to you. So share with those people, because some of them, they've recovered now from the challenges that's there. But what is the message that you would tell them that they need to do going forward to really repay those individuals?
Awesome. So I will begin by backing it up just a little bit. Lately in the news, they tell you how bad everything is. They tell you how many jobs we lost. They tell you how many unknowns we have and how horrible our political system is, regardless of which side of the aisle you want to hang out on. So they tell you how bad everything is. And then usually somewhere near the end, between the weather and the sports that don't even exist anymore, they'll tuck in one little story of a group of police officers pulling up their cars in front of a hospital and turning on all the sirens, celebrating the workers. They'll celebrate in Italy. Every day at a set time, how all the people leave the indoors, they come out onto the balconies and they sing celebration for all the hospital workers leaving to go off to battle. So in life, it's easy to get misinformation on who the heroes are. We think it's Hollywood, and we think it's the people on the sport field, the guys in the arena. And yet who the real heroes ultimately are none of those folks. It's the ordinary hero. It's the lady with the name badge that has RN behind her name. It's the therapist. It's the custodian. It's the physician. It's the first responder. It's the police officer. It's the folks who make Wonder Bread and deliver it to your grocery store so you don't starve. We don't think we need any of those little people, and it's a great lie. There are no little people. There are people who think little of others, which is a lie, but every role, every job matters. And times of crisis remind us of who matters most. And it is our brothers and sisters, and it is the ladies and gentlemen who are going into the front line serving them. So I'm so inspired every time I see a delivery truck with bread in it, every time I see the soup containers being delivered to whether it's my family or someone else's family, every time I see a first responder or a healthcare professional go off into battle. So those are the ones who inspire me, but you don't need to look to the headlines or to the hospitals to find them, Gary. You see them in your own life. You had a great pastor, a rabbi, or a priest growing up. You had a wonderful teacher. When you did not think you could do third grade math, they told you, Gary Wilbers, yes, you can. You're going to run your own business someday. You're going to launch a podcast. You're going to touch lives around the world. And it's really not you who started this podcast. It's that third grade teacher. And so one thing we always encourage our audiences to do, whether it's in a big auditorium or a podcast, is to pause at some point and thank that person. It could be a parent, it could be a daughter, it could be a partner, a spouse, a coworker. It could be the person delivering the food to the store who you've never once looked at other than to get around with your big cart. This time, what an opportunity to thank someone on the front line of your life for the work they do and the impact they've had. So today, I always listen to podcasts hoping for a couple takeaways and maybe an action or two. But maybe one of the action steps for your audience chargers is to thank at least one person today for their impact on your life. They will be better because of it, and so will you.
John O'Leary, I was at your conference in St. Louis that you had, and you gave us that challenge. And I went back and I decided I had a fourth grade teacher.
Oh, wow.
And she wasn't the sweet, lovable type of fourth grade. She actually was very demanding and expected more out of you. And I had this art project that I did at Christmas time that I could remember. And I'll be honest, art was not one of my cup of teas. It's not my philosophy, my art. God just didn't give me a lot of ability there. I, of course, rushed through it because I wanted to just get it done. And I took it up and showed it to her, and she said, "Is that what you want to give your mother this Christmas?" Well, of course, even as a fourth grader, I went back and worked on it some more. I can't tell you it was a beautiful piece of art, but of course, every year after that, my mother would put that out. So
Wow.
that brought that story up because what it brought was a message of she demanded more. She expected you to give your best. And in life, I followed that message.
Yes.
So I came back and I actually saw her she was at my local church, and I saw her and I let Mrs. Brown know that you made a difference in my life. And she said, that was so nice of you to say that. And I said, well, you made a difference in my life, and I just wanted you to know it. She's
Garrett,
passed on now.
I would
But
imagine
one
you,
of those things, you make a difference.
4 decades probably or so after you
Yeah.
left 4th grade, a little boy, now a man with some gray coming in finally, goes up to this teacher, Mrs. Braun, and says, thank you, man. Like this is a woman who, I promise you, if I know people, I know myself at least, we all struggle with self-confidence and value and worth. For you to remind Mrs. Braun that 4 decades earlier, she'd said something, did something that impacted you then and continues to impact you today, it's a game changer. And so you're the fact that you took me up on that assignment is awesome. And now I hope our audience right now at home, outside, throwing mulch around, whatever you're doing right now, what a cool opportunity for you to hit pause and go inside, look somebody up and let them know that you appreciate her.
Yeah. It would make all the difference. Now, John, I loved your first book, On Fire, and I'd tell people if you haven't got it, you need to get that. But your second book, which I had the honor of being an advanced reader of, is awesome. I use that word for a reason. In all, invites us to return to the joy of navigating life with the freedom of a child. You identify 5 senses children innately possess. Explain why you pick those senses and why you think it's so critical for us to.
Perfect. It's another great question. So first I would begin by saying I was identifying in the audiences that I spoke to, Gary, that frequently adults would not fully participate. They would not really raise their hands. They would not really turn to their neighbors. They wouldn't laugh quite as loud. They wouldn't cry quite as strongly. And they wouldn't connect quite as thoroughly. They wouldn't dream quite as massively about what they could do in their business, but also in their lives. And then I would leave these auditoriums and these stadiums and for fun, just go into schoolhouses. And every time I would ask a question, their little hands would pop up. And every time I would have them say, well, who's an artist? Every hand would go up. Who thinks tomorrow's going to be better than yesterday? Every hand would go up. And then I would come home, take my kids to school the following day, and watch as they skipped out of the car into the school building. And I was thinking, Gary, why are they so engaged? What do they have that we no longer have? And can we return to it? Can we return to that childlike wonder that allowed us to raise our hand, connect with one another, participate wildly, and believe in our heart of hearts that the best was yet to come? Could that happen? So doing a lot of research over a couple of years, I recognized that there were 5 gifts that kids had that we've lost. But the cool thing is, unlike most senses, sight, ears, smell, taste, we can't really pick those guys back up again. But these 5 senses that kids have, we can return to. And so I identified 5. Well, I'll go through them slowly, I guess, just to make sure people can identify what they are. But the very first is the sense of wonder. Kids, and those of you listening right now at home, whether you have your own children, you had your own kids, or you've ever seen a child anywhere along your way through life, you recognize when you tell them something, they always follow up with a question. You know, Johnny, go brush your teeth. And the question always is, why? Or they say, hey, Daddy, why is the sky blue? And you tell them, and then there's a follow-up. Why? And why? It's always the first question. Kids question everything. They don't do it to be pains in the neck. They may become pains in the neck in doing this, but they want to know the reason why something is the way it is. And ultimately, they also want to know, could we make it better? Whatever it is, could we make it even somehow better? And through education and through some weaknesses, I think, in our parenting models, we tell them to stop asking that question. Remind them if they don't brush their teeth, they're going to get in trouble. We remind them on that test, there's only one way to answer the question, and it's my way or the highway. You want to see the principal again? You want to go in the hallway again, Billy? And so very quickly in life, we are trained to stop asking questions. And the problem with that, and I think there are many, the problem is we also believe that it's unhealthy somehow to be curious, to be inquisitive, and to step into life with your eyes wide open with wonder. Kids experience everything for the first time, Gary. So the first time they see a tree blossom, for them, it's overwhelming. It blows them away. And we yawn as we walk past it. Kids see earthworms and they're moved to the point of stopping, staring, and poking. And we step over. Kids are in awe when they take an escalator ride up in a shopping mall. to such a degree that they take it back down and back up again. And it's not just kids. I was watching a video recently in a sub-Saharan country in Africa where they built their first ever indoor shopping mall, which meant they also built the first ever indoor escalators. And these are adults, would ride to the top, laugh all the way up, turn, and come back down and do it again, because it was the first time they'd experienced something. So one of the cool things we can return to, kids, is to try to see the lens of life again through the eyes of wonder, as if we are seeing our spouse for the first time. What might that do in that relationship? With our kids, remember the first time you held your kid. Well, they're not like that anymore at 22 when they're late for curfew. You don't see them through that same lens of awe, of wonder. But you can. Kids do, and so can we. So that's why we began in our book, the book called In Awe, with a sense of wonder. I think it's foundational to begin the journey.
Yeah, I think it becomes huge. And the way you framed it up, it just really gets your senses going, just like you shared on the podcast here, is having that wonder, having that curiosity. And as adults, we can still do this, but we have to decide to put it into our life and move forward. Share another one, John.
Another sense?
Yep.
My favorite sense, not to go, you should never say, who's your favorite kid, Gary? But I'll tell you my favorite kid. It's really tied for two, sense 4 and sense 5. Sense 5 is freedom, which anyone who's ever seen a child recognizes that they go through life unbounded. They're not chained to ego, chained to someone else's expectations, chained to fear of what you might think about me when I walk into a room. I mean, kids don't even brush their hair. They never brush their teeth. They'd rather not shower if they could get away with it. They don't care. They're free. And I'm not telling you listeners not to brush your hair, not take a shower, and not to brush your teeth. The exact opposite, in fact. There are some social norms we should follow, including washing your hands during a pandemic, by the way. But in addition to all of that, my favorite sense is belonging. And last year, Gary, during a period where the market was at historic highs, unemployment was at historic lows, meaning everything was trending seemingly in the right direction. Last year, 1.5 million American citizens attempted suicide. And Cigna, this large insurance carrier, did a research study on this, and they said mental health is certainly a big piece of it. But many of these people are identifying themselves as being completely isolated from their neighbors, from their coworkers, and even from their own family. The vast majority, over 90% of millennials, say that they have no friend to lean into with truth. No one that they could really say how they're really, really, really doing in life. We got a lot of buddies, a lot of people we know, a huge network, but no one that we really are doing life with, which means more than half of us, according to Cigna, are isolated. And here we are now with the doors of our buildings locked and churches shuttering and businesses closing down, and you're not even allowed anymore to go see your neighbors. I worry candidly much less about the epidemic and the pandemic than I do about the consequences of us trying to do life all by ourselves. And one of the reasons I love your podcasts is because every single time you're giving us a call to action to go out beyond ourselves and serve as our brothers and sisters keepers. Belonging reminds us that we are not intended to do life by ourselves. And right now, physically, we need some proximity. We need 6 to 10 feet minimally of separation. But there are ways profoundly to connect with those who are needing us. It could be a knock on the door and canned goods delivered to an older neighbor with a little love letter on top, her favorite dessert tucked inside. It could be a call to an old friend that you haven't seen in years, but you know he's living on his own. You know he doesn't have a great connection with his family and he's between jobs. It could be surprising somebody with a couple $100 in their mailbox when you know that they need it way more than you do right now. It's a way to remind them that they're not alone. And ultimately, the way we get there is to look in the mirror and recognize that we belong. You can't model this until you believe it. And I was taught this, Gary, by a 4-year-old boy named Jack, my son Jack. And he taught it to me many times along the way, but specifically for this instance, I was shaving, my shirt was off, my little boy was next to me, looking in the mirror with me, trying to be just like his dad. He's standing on top of the toilet. I'm standing in front of the sink. He's got a shaver in his hand with a little blade cover on it. And I've got the real deal, man, bringing it down the side of my face. And because I don't have a shirt on, I got these thick scars over my chest. And little Jack looks over. He's a little guy, he's 4. He starts tracing one of the scars. Then he looks up at me and says, "Daddy, your tummy is red. It is bumpy. And it is ridgy." I'm like, oh, here we go, man. I got to explain to him that I got burned, that it's going to be all the stuff that we adults kind of walk through in our minds. And I got to remind him it's okay. But before I can even get there, little Jack says, and Daddy, I love it. I just love it, Daddy. What he saw was, I think, the way children see life, unencumbered through the lens of self-doubt. They don't have it yet. Ego hasn't developed really in kids yet. Through this lens of acceptance and through this lens of encouraging somebody else that they belong. Because Jack felt as if he belonged. Kids feel this way. They belong, man. They belong. We lose sight of that belonging. So first, we got to recognize it individually. Like, Gary, you belong. You have value, man. You're a sacred treasure with royal blood coursing through your veins, man. We have one father. There are no grandchildren in this picture, the album that he's got. I don't know if your audience can see the video or not later on, but I got a picture behind me of the prodigal son. And it's the boy coming back after making every mistake in the world, and he's got a daddy who's bending over, hugging on him. And that's the kind of dad we have. We belong. Now that you know that, I hope you do, now you get to go out there and remind others of that truth, that they belong. Even in a period where we feel isolated, where the doors are locked, where unemployment's mounting, where the headwind is blowing, where panic is spreading, you belong. And that's enough to take the next step forward together.
Yeah, it makes all the difference. And you can make that difference for others. That's what we're telling you. You can make that difference because you help people feel like they're belonging. Instead of just letting life go back to normal, why don't we change how we respond to this? I reached out to my audiences and I was telling them, call 5 people a day.
Awesome.
You may not be able to see them in person, but give them a call. And instead of texting someone on their birthday, I'm calling them now. Instead of putting that message on Facebook, instead of being impersonal, make it personable. Which way can you do it? And I think this fits with it because you talk about it in the book, John, and on page 105, you make this statement. One of the great thieves of joy is simply not being present to the task at hand.
Whew. Whoever wrote that was smart, man. Like,
He's a smart guy. What do you mean by that?
Well, geez, we've all noticed, for those of us who had busy jobs or who had busy families, how different life is when we can't do anything. Many of us can't get in our cars. None of us can take public transportation. Many of us are either between jobs or locked at home. And none of us are running around to soccer practice, baseball games, all these activities that kept us busy. The cool thing is when you focus on the person, the job, the task, or the tree right in front of you, the very thing in front of you starts taking on greater meaning. And so many of us are recognizing during this time of isolation how much more meaningful the relationships at home are. Many of us are recognizing how profoundly beautiful nature is. Many of us are recognizing how stressed we were all the time when we were just trying to multitask. We write a lot in the book about the errant belief that multitasking is beneficial. All research says it's not. Well, during the season, we're proving that true. We're actually focusing on one thing at a time. And in doing so, not only are we getting it done better, but we're experiencing the journey more so. So that's called joy. It's not the same as happy. Happy is an ice cream cone. But the ice cream cone either melts in your hand or it makes you overweight or lethargic or whatever it's going to do over time. That's happiness. Happiness is fleeting. Joy is enduring. Joy has nothing to do with the boundaries, the headwind, the things going on around you. It's being present to the task at hand.
That's the real key. And hopefully that's my goal is I hope people realize as we've going through this, that there is something that we can come out on the other side of it. It's about slowing down. It's saying yes to the moment versus yes to all the stuff that's out there in the world. There's one other piece, John, that I definitely wanted to share with you and kind of really resonate with me in your book. And then this was on page 223. You say, all is a part of the human experience because it promotes a sense of the small self and turns us towards the greater good, the bigger picture. Going back to our ancestral origins, it helps us to live in groups more successfully, peacefully, and collaboratively. And then you end the book with this message. My friend, the day is new and the sun is rising. You choose where you go from here. You can continue doing things the way you've been doing them, but instead, I hope you accept the invitation of all. It's time to unleash your inspiration, meaning, and joy, and see what is possible when you live in awe. I think they are meant for right now, my friend. this uncertain time, that message needs to be shared to the world. Can you share with the Chargers? I can see your emotion even because John and I are on Zoom that you even feel with that. But it's even more true than when you wrote it right now.
So it's Gary. I mean, let me back into the question with a long-winded but hopefully poignant answer. I struggled academically all the way through school, all the way, and maybe in no class more than English. So the idea of a guy who struggles with self-confidence, struggles academically, and struggles in English to be a best-selling author and to be a public speaker and to be a podcast host it's grace. And so when I hear you share these sentences that are really like they move me, I just recognize I didn't write that. It's like none of this is my work. It's me being used as a vessel for a cause much bigger than me because I'm not that good. But I would remind our audience the same is true for you if you just kind of get out of the way. So that's where I wanted to begin the answer. The second thing is that part on awe that you shared was coming after a session where I think I shared 564 astronauts have returned from the heavens, and all of them upon returning have been changed. Once you see the Earth for the real perspective that it is, you recognize how small you are. Like the fact that your wife gives you trouble about leaving cups in the sink, it doesn't really make you so mad anymore because you recognize, oh man, we're all one. Get over it. Maybe I should do a better job not leaving cups in the sink. So it just kind of settles you down a little bit, but it also opens up your mind, your heart, and your eyes a little bit to the grandeur of beauty, of life, of human life, including your own. So that's another piece. And the third piece I would share is this. My grandfather was my hero, and he is a greatest generation guy. Born during the Great Depression, went off to war, and then built the country. We call them the greatest generation, but I would suggest to you, Chargers, they weren't the greatest generation because they endured the Depression. We all try to endure poverty. Like that's really not even that remarkable, candidly. I mean, who doesn't try to endure their situation? We do. An animal tries to endure whatever situation they're in. So that's not that special. Going off to war, every nation in the globe that day was fighting. So that it wasn't necessarily the fact that they volunteered to serve because everybody was going off to serve. It's remarkable. It's cool. It's special. But that's not the separator either. I think what really made our greatest generation, the greatest generation, and this is the invitation for all of us, is when they returned finally safely. They never forgot the lessons that the Great Depression and World War II taught them. They were redeemed, they were transformed, and they were inspired to make the entire world, starting with their neighborhood, a better place. So here's the deal. Rather than just getting through this period, because you will get through this period, you will. This pandemic is unlikely to claim your life. It's going to unfortunately claim many of our lives, but it's unlikely mathematically to claim yours. This economy will eventually return. Historically, we've had 13 stock markets drop below 20% in the last 50 years. They've dropped a grand total of 26%. And in this next 6 months, they've returned 28%. So from a historical standpoint, we will be back to where we were in 6 months. Hang on for the ride. It might be painful. It might take 3 years and not 6 months, but this too shall pass. My hope and my prayer for all of you is that you not forget what you're being taught right now. That's the gift of this painful, agonizing, sad, tragic season. That it can be redeemed. It can be redeemed in your life. It can be used to make you an even better version of yourself. So don't let the season be wasted. Good Friday is here, man, but Easter is coming. So let's get ready for the ride.
What a great message. Thank you, John, for sharing that. And I just love never forget the lessons we learn. And that's what we can learn out of this is the lessons that we can learn through this challenge and come out on the other side better, but not to forget the lessons. That becomes the key. And that becomes really the key of living in awe. And I'm telling you, Chargers, you need to pick this book up, In Awe, Rediscover Your Childlike Wonder to Unleash Inspiration, Meaning, and Joy. It's going to be available on bookshelves starting May 5th, which is Cinco de Mayo.
Party on, man. Get your Corona beer, get your Dos Equis, get your tequilas or whatever else you're drinking or your waters and coffees. Get a copy of In Awe. If you're looking for a website to find it, you can visit us at readinawe.com. readinawe.com. And if you're ever thinking some gloomy thoughts and you believe that you're not really worthy and you believe that the best days are behind us and you believe that you're not your brothers and sisters keeper and you believe that you're not that special, read In Awe. because you will recognize how profoundly blessed you are to simply be in the game. And Gary, I wrote about this in the book a little bit. I know I'm a miracle because I survived the unsurvivable. 100% burn, like you just don't pull through. But I think I know something that the rest of us should know, that you should not be here either. The mathematical odds of you being in this game, your daddy and your mama coming together at just the right moment for the DNA that now represents Gary Wilbers, it's less than 1 in 400 trillion, which I think I did a little bit of research on. It means you're 1,100 times more likely to win the Powerball, 1,100 times more likely to win the Powerball than to be in this game. And here you are, Chargers. So let's not take this day for granted. Let's not take your life for granted. And let's believe again that you are a miracle. You are a gift, and you are called to get out there in the community and to remind others of that same truth.
And that becomes the key. And I'm telling you, I would highly recommend check out the book. You're going to love it. We'll have all of it in show notes. So go to chargepodcast.com. If you were cutting grass or you were exercising and you didn't get that down on that website, Chris will have that all in the show notes for you. Now, John, you've been on the podcast before, so I didn't think we could do just the same old recharge round.
No,
so instead, I'm going to ask you 3 fun facts about John O'Leary. And he doesn't know what these are, so it's going to kind of, hopefully we don't throw him off. I try not to give him too tough of questions. But my first one is, what was your favorite activity as a child? And that could be sports,
right?
It could be school, it could be anything. What was your favorite activity?
For me, it was certainly baseball. So I'm a huge baseball fan, but I'm also I was a little player, man. So I would just come home from school from 3:15 until my mama rang the dinner bell at 6. I would play outside, and then I'd go back outside afterwards if there was still daylight. So I loved baseball.
Tell us a funny story about your family growing up that you remember.
Man, when you grow up with 6 kids, there are almost too many to share. But I think my favorite, and it's on the wall behind me, we were on our way to Florida. We packed up a station wagon. We're going to go 20 hours consecutive. And, just being in an old station wagon with vinyl on the red seats and fake wood on the outside. And then in Macon, Georgia, the smoke starts coming out of the car. We pulled over. There's a 2-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 9-year-old. Like, we go all the way up to 17. My brother's guitar made the trip. And so I have a picture outside of this car smoking with the hood up, and we're all standing in front of it. And in the picture, we're all sad. Like, we're all really sad in the picture. But what I remember right before we took that picture is my dad yelled out as the tow truck guy was taking the picture. He's like, "Oh, kids, everybody act sad." And we acted sad. But the reality was, even in this moment, I mean, it stinks, man. It's summer vacation. You're on your way down. The car burns up. You're on the side of the road. And even then, our family was packed with faith and joy and hope and love. So on our faces is sadness, but the truth was on our hearts was joy.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. My last question for you. Share with us how you stay so humble, speaking to tens of thousands of people every year, and you're still the John O'Leary I met 12 years ago.
Man, life. So I think people start to believe what others say about them. And I play to an audience of one, and it's not even me or my wife. It's our Father. It's our Creator. And I think He's got great things planned for me. But the only way to even listen to that is to remain incredibly humble to His will, not mine, all the way through. So that's a big piece of it. The other is this, man. Every single day I look in the mirror, I see my own face staring back at me, but I also see scars. I see sores. I see brokenness. I see adversity. And so it's hard for me to think, oh, gosh, I'm so good, when I see really only brokenness staring back at me. But I also see the beauty behind the scars. And so my life is not easy. I think a lot of people might think from the outside, man, John's got a beautiful wife and 4 healthy kids and seemingly a great career, but it's not easy. But it's good. It is so good. I'm so blessed. And I just hope other listeners right now recognize, I hope right now they're saying me too. Like, between their jobs right now, me too. As their 401ks right now are burning, me too. As they're struggling with a sick spouse right now, me too. That it's not perfect this side of eternity, but it is good. The foundation is firm, and the best is in front of us.
John O'Leary, I can't thank you enough for being on the Charge podcast. I knew this would be very special, and I'm looking excited for your book to really take off in all. I know it's going to be something a must read for everyone to have, and I totally recommend the audience to go out and purchase this book, because this man has given us a new way to look at things. And I think over the last several months, we found out there's more in life than what we think. And the thing is, it's not about all the busyness. It's really about what is now. And John O'Leary is just one of those people that makes a difference. And John, any last words you'd like to leave with the audience?
First, thanks for listening to Gary Wilbers. He's a friend of mine. He's a guy whose heart is so pure. And so I've been a fan of Gary's for as long as I've known him. And so you're listening to a really phenomenal man here. And I just want to thank you, Gary, for being my friend, for carrying forward this message, and for staying in touch. And audience, if you want to learn more about our book one final time, visit me at readinall.com.
Please check that out, readinall.com. We'll have that on show notes at chargepodcast.com. Please check it out. And we're going to be back next week with another great guest. But Chargers, I want to give you that challenge we said. We gave you a challenge of reaching out to one person and letting them know that they've made a difference in your life. Give them a call, send them a note, visit them, whatever works best for you, decide what that is, and then reach out to those individuals. The second thing that I think John set up well for us is let's learn the lessons that we should have really be taking from the last several months. What are those lessons that we can move forward? Really realizing that life can be a little bit simpler and be more enjoyable, and you can live it in all. Thanks for joining me, Chargers. We'll see you back here next week. Make it a great day.
This podcast is ended, but your life doesn't just stop. To continue your inspiring journey, head over to chargepodcast.com and access all the tools and resources mentioned on today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing with somebody who may also benefit from the advice provided. That's chargepodcast.com. Until next time, charge in business and life.